When most Americans make videos about Europe, they talk about the most popular European countries: Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, France, the UK, maybe a few of the Nordics, and maybe Switzerland. You don't really see a whole lot of Americans making videos about these countries right here. In fact, it was very difficult for me to even find videos of Americans in these countries to analyze. But I went through the extra effort because I believe that you deserve your flowers and attention just like the other European countries. Bearing that in mind, in this video, we will be analyzing Americans experiencing culture shocks in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia.
Things I think the US should learn from Latvia. First up, saunas or pirts. I love this aspect of the culture in this part of the world. I think it is so cool that so many people have saunas in their houses or their country homes. I have visited some public saunas with locals here, and it is such an interesting cultural experience. I love hearing people's stories about growing up here and every week going to the pirts with their family. I think it's so cool that they carve out this time for physical and mental health and spending time with family. I wish we had more of them in the US. We do have some saunas in some spas or gyms, but they're not very popular and they're not very common. In the US, we usually associate saunas with being rich. Rich people go to saunas. Rich people have saunas, not really your normal person. I think we need to change this. In the US, saunas should be more accessible and we should have more of them. Growing your own food. This is gonna sound really silly, but honestly, before I came here, I didn't think that casually growing food at your house was really an option. It's just not something people do in the States. I can't speak for everyone in the US, and I'm sure there are some people who grow produce, but I've lived in 3 different states and I've only ever met 2 people who grew any kind of produce in their gardens. Generally, people just don't have gardens and don't grow food. I think it's so cool that the majority of people here in Latvia keep gardens where they grow tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and apples and so much produce. I don't know why we don't do this in the States, but now I wish we did. I'm not very good with plants. I can hardly keep the plants in my apartment alive, but now I just feel like I need to have a garden. Cooking instead of relying on takeout and frozen meals. When I first got to Latvia, I was surprised to hear that people cook every night and hardly go out to eat. Now I've realized that in the States, we rely way too much on takeout and frozen meals. I'm not sure why, but I think this might be because of our work schedules. Most people don't leave work at 5 o'clock to go home for dinner. I think our society is generally more centered around work and productivity. Most people may not leave the office until 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. By the time we get home, we're exhausted and we just want to go to bed. It's easier to just grab takeout on your way home from work or pop a frozen meal in the microwave for 3 minutes than to actually cook. Since I've been here in Latvia, I've been trying to be more intentional about making time to cook. No surprises here, I found that I felt a lot better. I really think that in the US, we need to make more time to cook.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know the first thing about Latvia before watching that video right there. In fact, the only thing I knew about Latvia is that that's where Kristaps Porzingis is from. Shout out to him. But I learned quite a bit. For starters, sauna culture. This is something that's been coming up in almost all of my recent videos, and I don't really know why. I guess saunas are a very big part of life in Europe, especially in the colder climate countries like Latvia. I'm assuming it's a colder climate country based on where it's located. I know it's somewhere kind of near Finland, if I'm correct. Let me know if I'm wrong in the comments. So it does make sense to have saunas as a major part of the culture, but she brought up a really interesting point there that I never really considered in the other videos, which is that in the US, saunas are seen as more of a rich person thing. And now that I think about it, she has a really good point. I feel like in the US, when I think about saunas, I think about those ultra productive types. And we'll talk about productivity here in a second, but I think about those ultra productive types who wake up at 3:30 a.m. and they put on these red glasses for whatever reason, or go in a red light room, and then they go in the sauna, and then they go from the sauna to an ice bath. And by the time they finish their morning routine, it's already 9 o'clock, and they spent all that time doing a whole bunch of nothing. and calling it productivity. Whereas in Europe, it seems like saunas are more so associated with relaxation. Now, as far as growing your own food goes, that's something that I honestly wouldn't have expected, especially given that, again, I'm pretty sure Latvia is a pretty cold climate, so I would think that that would make farming in your own backyard especially very, very difficult to do. But I'm also not an agricultural expert, and to her point, just like her, I probably can't keep a houseplant alive for more than a few days. So maybe you know something that I don't. But it's really cool to see such a self-sustaining society. It's nice to see that you're taking that initiative to grow your own food, because I'm not gonna lie, with the way things are looking in the world right now, that might be a very, very useful skill to have moving forward, as sad as it is to say. But what I wanna know is, where did this start? Why is this a part of Latvian culture specifically? Because I haven't really known this to be the case in any other European country, at least the ones that I have made videos about. I'm sure that it does exist, but it doesn't seem to be a very common thing at all. I feel like in the Netherlands, you had the large farms, multiple acres, the big commercial farms, and then you had people who lived in not urban environments, but places where it wouldn't really be considered normal to grow your own food, aside from maybe a small plant for, I don't know, cilantro or something like that. Again, I don't know anything about agriculture. Now, as far as cooking fresh meals versus opting for takeout, I'm not gonna lie, I feel like she did exaggerate a little bit about American working hours. Granted, I've never worked a 9 to 5 in the US. I worked at service industry jobs. So of course those had irregular hours where sometimes you might get off at noon, sometimes you might get off at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. But I feel like if you go to most American cities, traffic rush hour is around 6 to 7 p.m. which means that most people are getting off before that time. You're not really gonna see rush hour in most American cities at 9 or 10 p.m. You're just not gonna see that. I think that the reason why Americans opt for takeout is because groceries are so expensive. Look, when I lived on my own in the US and I was cooking my own food and buying my own food, so on and so forth, what I quickly found out was that it was about the same price for me to get frozen pizzas, which all I had to do was just put them in the oven, frozen vegan pizzas at that. So vegan food in the US is more expensive than non-vegan food as a general rule of thumb. I found that to be the exact opposite in the Netherlands. Let me know how it is in Latvia. But I found that it was cheaper, or at the very worst, I would break even just getting frozen vegan pizzas than to get fresh ingredients and cook them. And we're talking about from the same store. It's not like I was going from a cheaper store getting the vegan pizzas to going to a very high-end store to get the fresh ingredients. It's the same exact store. I would shop at Target, and I wasn't saving any money by doing that, and I was losing a whole bunch of extra time. So I pretty much ate almost exclusively frozen food for I think I spent a year and some change in that apartment. Which, looking back on it, probably wasn't the best for my health, but I digress. I think that's the reason why a lot of Americans tend to do either takeout or just get frozen food that they can put in the oven. One of the biggest things that shocked me going to Europe, especially living in the Netherlands for 14 months, was realizing that high quality food, high quality groceries were accessible for your average person. This blew my mind because in the US, for starters, the food quality standards are already lower than in Europe. But then on top of that, in order to get the high quality food, I feel like a misconception is that Americans don't have access to high quality food. They do have access to it, they just can't afford it. So really, effectively, they don't have access to it. But I think that maybe that's why she was seeing some people working until 9 p.m. or 8 p.m. It was because they can't afford high quality food, and maybe they want to live a long life. Maybe they should start growing their own food like they do in Latvia.
I've been living in Lithuania for more than 2 years now, and there are a few things that really surprised me about life here. So let's talk about them. The first thing is how common secondhand shopping is here. Of course, thrifting, secondhand shopping has become a super trendy thing all over the world in the past few years. But in Lithuania, it doesn't feel like a trend. It feels like part of the culture. I don't know. And honestly, after moving here, it totally made sense to me that Vinted was founded by a Lithuanian. The second thing, young boys are obsessed with the luxury cars here. You'll often see little kids filming super fancy cars on the streets, and sometimes car owners let them sit inside and take pictures, and the kids go absolutely crazy. It's super adorable, but also kind of wild to see how big this interest is. I don't know. Speaking of cars, the third one is luxury in general is a big thing here. In Vilnius, you can see really expensive cars on the streets, and they often have custom plates like money or other personalized ones. And it feels to me like showing your wealth here is a big thing. And the last thing, it feels like everyone has kids. I'm 28 right now, and most people around my age have already one or even more children. It really surprised me at first because it's really common here compared to where I'm from. So let me know if you've noticed the same things or if you would add anything else.
Secondhand shopping, I'm really glad to see that trend is starting to really gain traction all around the world. I don't know who started that trend. I think that maybe just out of necessity, some people had no option but to go secondhand. But it's nice to see that that's becoming a more socially acceptable thing, even in American society, which is very status oriented. I know growing up, if you were caught wearing something secondhand, you were going to hear about it from people at school. That's just the way it was. But nowadays, if you can find a cool outfit at the thrift store, you might win the best dressed award at your school. And I haven't been in school in about 7 years, but I imagine that all in all, the culture surrounding secondhand shopping has become a lot more accepting. And that is a very monumental step forward for a society like the USA's. I can't speak to other places, but it's nice to see that people are embracing that. The juxtaposition between that and the luxury lifestyle, that's interesting. That's something that I don't know that I really saw anywhere else that I went to in Europe. Granted, the only culture I truly embedded myself into was Dutch culture. I lived in the Netherlands for 14 months. But in the Netherlands, I feel like luxury culture is not only rare, but it's actually kind of frowned upon. Now, whether you think this is a good or bad thing is pretty subjective. I can kind of see it from both perspectives, where on one hand, you shouldn't really feel compelled to flaunt your wealth, because what other purpose does that serve than to make other people feel bad about themselves and the position that they're in life, and by extension boost your own ego? But then on the other hand, I do feel like, especially for those young boys that she was referring to, that can inspire them to maybe strive for more than they previously thought they were capable of. I know that for me personally, being exposed to a luxurious lifestyle early on really encouraged me to reach further than I otherwise would have. Hence why I ended up starting a YouTube channel. If I hadn't been exposed to that from a young age, you wouldn't be watching this video right now, because I wouldn't have made it. That said, I feel like it's almost universal across cultures that if a 10-year-old boy sees a Lamborghini driving down the street, they're at least gonna look. They may not take pictures everywhere, but they are going to look at it. I feel like that's just almost human instinct. When something stands out, you're going to be drawn to that thing. But as far as the luxury lifestyle in general, with the custom license plates and the fancy cars, things of that nature, probably designer clothes as well, which again is pretty interesting measuring that up against the secondhand culture. But that kind of reminds me of not only American culture, but culture here in Southeast Asia. I feel like both are fairly consumer oriented. Granted, I suspect that Lithuania is not really at the extreme end of the spectrum, like you'll see in the US and Southeast Asia, where a lot of your social status is tied to your wealth rather than your contributions to society. But let me know if I'm wrong about that, because I don't know really anything about Lithuania at all.
Things you shouldn't do to Estonian people.
Tere,
Tere,
where are you from?
Estonia.
Oh, so you speak Russian in your country? Oh shit. Oh, sorry. What do you do for a living?
I'm a barista.
Barista. Oh, how much do you get paid? Damn it. I'm so sorry. Oh, do you have siblings or how old are they? You have two sisters, brothers? Because I have two sisters and they used to like bully me when I was little and it was so hard childhood and not again, what did I do wrong?
So this person in the comments right here said, so just don't talk to them. Now look, I don't think I've ever met an Estonian person in my whole entire life, so I don't really know anything about Estonian culture, but I do feel like that part of the world, and by that part of the world, I don't even just mean Europe overall, I mean that part of Europe, the Nordics, just the colder climate countries in Europe, tend to kind of have that in common, that the people are very introverted and very particular about how they engage in those social interactions, assuming that they speak Russian. Now, I don't even know where Estonia is. I think it's bordering Finland, which means that it must be very close to Russia, if not bordering Russia as well. Make fun of my American geography skills all you want in the comments, but I feel like that's a fair assumption to make if you don't know anything about the history of Estonia, which I don't. But at the same time, I do feel like a lot of countries have their own unique language, which I'm assuming in Estonia would be Estonian. Let me know if I'm wrong about that, because just like with Lithuania and Latvia, I don't know the first thing about Estonia. I don't know anything about what language you speak. I don't know anything about the culture, other than the fact that just like in the Nordic countries, people clearly are not quite as outgoing. I mean, he brought up that talking too much is a no-no in social interactions, and I'm not gonna lie to you, that's something that I admire. That's something that I admire, that it's socially acceptable to not want to engage in these long-winded conversations that lead nowhere. Granted, I do feel like there aren't that many things in life that are better than a good conversation. But you know when you're in a good conversation versus when you're in a meaningless conversation, an empty conversation, a small talk conversation. And there's a time and a place for going into your life history and divulging your deepest, darkest secrets and things of that nature. I don't think casual conversation is the time or place for that. Now, as far as asking about pay, I'm not gonna lie, I feel like that's kind of considered rude in almost every country and culture. In the US, it may be normal to ask people what they do, and then you can deduce what they pay based on that. People might go on Google and see what the average salary is for that position. But to just go and ask somebody how much they make, I feel like that's kind of crazy. I know that personally. One time I was playing basketball, and here I go with my long-winded story and explanation. I hope I'm not making you click off the video, but one time I was playing basketball in this affluent area near where I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas, USA, obviously. And I was there with a friend, and the friend was filming a video, and these guys approached him and asked him about YouTube, and then the friend directed them to me, and he was like, He's the actual YouTuber because I guess at that time I already had built a decent following, so on and so forth. One of the guys came up to me. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't ask for my YouTube channel. He didn't ask how I got into YouTube. I shit you not. This man came up to me. He's probably 17 or 18 years old. He asked me, if you had to guess, how much do you think you've made in total from YouTube? I mean, I've never seen this man in my life. I don't know his name. He doesn't know my name. That's the first interaction that we have. It was one of the most mind-blowing experiences I ever had in my whole entire life. I don't even remember what I said to him, but it was crazy. It was an absolutely crazy question to ask. And I feel like in most contexts, in most cultures, in most countries, it would be crazy as well. So I don't think this is an Estonia specific thing. I think this is just a common sense human thing, but evidently I could be wrong.